You want to get some. You're going to do position. We're going to get. You want some coffee?
Because we know that because in a way, all of us are funded. We are not related somehow. You know, all people can demonstrate how to think about it. No, it's, you know, very delicate that with what size. What is now I can see a shift in the time. Because the decision of cognitive science is the center, all of us, we don't want to fund it to the school. No, just gradually a project, we could say this is right. This is now, yes. But whereas before, we all went to the extra. It is Dutchess Lake. Notice the need is one of the psychological academy and education. And there is a form of street science. But the street, I don't really keep it.
How are you?
So, should we start?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a great pleasure to have Abayomi visiting us from CBS. I think we met a few years ago. Abayomi is a young scholar, but with growing with a growing research agenda, and he's been quite influential in recent years in pushing the agenda of digital transformation. He had a big hit with Journal of Association of Information Systems, a paper that has been quite highly cited and discussed in various circles, and also recently won a couple of awards for another paper published in European Journal of IS. Is that based on empirical work with a German, Finnish company on digital transformation? So quite a lot of interesting stuff, both theoretically but also empirically. And it's a great pleasure to have you here. Looking forward to what you have to say, and obviously in the rest of the discussions that will follow in the rest of the day, hear more about a special issue on Information Systems Journal, pushing the frontiers on digital transformation. I'm sure you will have a lot of great discussions with not just the people in the room, but also people that will join you on the one-to-one meetings. So over to you, Abayomi.
Well, thank you so much, Panos, and thank you very much for coming here today to listen to this talk. I really appreciate having you. And thank you, Panos, for pronouncing my name so well. Not many dare to actually try to pronounce my name. But for everyone in the room, I just want to say there are no tricks to it. It is Abayomi, no tricks. But I've also found that it helps to call me AB. My mom calls me AB, so you really can't call me AB. Right, so today it's going to be, I'm talking about the digital X phenomena, and it's more of a, I hope we can make it more of a dialogue, a conversation, because this is part of a growing discourse. So I'll be presenting some thoughts, some ideas, but please feel free. Do I understand correctly that we have an hour and a half reserved for this? Or an hour and 20 at this point, is that correct, right? Okay, good.
Yes, so yeah, I mean, usually we run the lecture for 45 minutes, and the rest is for discussion.
Perfect. Okay. So I hope we can get much discussion from this. So a bit about myself. So I'm an associate professor at Copenhagen Business School. I'm also a research affiliate at MIT and a visiting scholar at the University of Finland. I've also done my bachelor's in the engineering field. So I have a bit of engineering the way I think. And I've also had some time in practice. I've worked as an entrepreneur, I've worked with SAP and among other companies. So there's also a practical side, it's beyond the theoretical things that I'll be talking about. And you see all this thinking kind of seep into the way I present the things I present, because I think research should have relevance. My research has very much been on digital transformation in the past few years. I did my PhD in the area of disruptive innovation. And design science is one of those things that I'm also really excited about. Again, going back to my engineering and practice-based experience. So that's a bit about myself. So I also like to actually pass it over to just so you can introduce yourselves and I get to know, have a bit of idea of those that I was speaking with today. So if you could kindly just go to the Menti, just go to your phone or tablet or laptop, go to menti.com and use the code that you see on the screen. Okay, so we have most of the people are academics. So that means I should expect quite some discussion going on because everyone will have opinions in the academic debate. All right, I think I'll move to the next slide. All right, I'd like to get a sense of the kind of research that's been done by the group that I'll be talking to here today. All right, presentation. Green bones.
This is great. I'm gonna use this for my teaching. Getting us right into the digital, right?
Right. Okay, AI. All right, interesting. So I see. So we there's a broad spectrum of research interest here. So let's hope we can talk to some of the things that you actually research. But let's move on. Thank you for letting me get a sense of the audience. I will now switch to my PowerPoint. All right, so the talk today, I've kind of structured them in two parts. There's a part where we're going to just talk about, look at the history, look at prior literature, how digital has been characterized. And the second part, we'll try and look forward and talk about what could we expect, how can we contribute to the discussion going forward. But starting first by looking at the roots of digital X. I'd like us to do a quick exercise, if you don't mind. So there's this piece of, if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, you could just help me sketch your interpretation of the sentence you see on the screen. So the I, the man, the he, and the telescope. If you need a piece of paper or a pen, that here has been so kind. You provided with some. So just let me know if you need. Everyone has some.
Yeah, can I have
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I have a pen?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You don't? You don't? Anyone still sketching? Everyone done? I see some people still moving. Done now? Are you done? All right, perfect. Okay, so who had this? Anyone with this? No. Okay.
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
that.
can I just see
Yeah.
your hands? So we got 4. All right.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh.
Anyone? We got 2, 3. Okay. And now? No one? And this? Brilliant. So yours is not here. You know, the fun thing about doing this exercise is as academics, they always come up with something new. So I'm really curious to see what you've got. So what do you have?
So I just got this second option that way.
So that's the second one.
Yeah, the
right?
second one I got, yeah.
Oh, so is there anyone whose representation is not on the screen?
Oh.
So 3, 4, 2. Okay, interesting. So I think there's a bit of what's the word? Similarity in the thinking patterns here, because I see a lot of people with 4 and a lot of people with 3, and 3 people and 4. Now, what this illustrates is that if we do not have a shared understanding of a particular concept, we might end up speaking past each other. Because it is exactly the same thing, but we all have different interpretations of it. And this actually brings me to what is called a scholarly lexicon. Now, scholarly lexicons are considered critical enablers of knowledge within the scientific community. They are essential building blocks for us to be able to contribute to knowledge. They foster the cumulative tradition that makes science grow. Now, Habermas actually kind of presents this in what he calls rational reconstruction. The idea that, well, this, whatever the lexicon is actually not fixed. They do shift. They shift as the assumptions, the history and institutional context of the community evolves. You may know this book, The Science, Structure of Scientific Revolution by Kuhn. If not the book, you probably have heard about the term paradigm shift. Paradigm shift, familiar? All right. So this book talks about shifts that occur in academic discourse. There's a recent paper in Information Systems Journal by Devson and Monidipa, where they talked about shifting baseline in information systems research. Now, all this points to the fact that there is a shift, and our lexicon is trying to catch up. The words we use to capture this shift is trying to catch up. And this has led to what I see as this proliferation of adding digital to things that we've known before. Digital transformation, digital marketing, digital strategy, digital capabilities. I just call them digital X. Now, one may just wonder why this is just a hype, is this just another buzzword that's been thrown around? If we look at a particular study was done by some folks, Picolia and Rodriguez, where they looked at the usage of digital and IT, specifically information systems field, and they realized that there's a trend. You see, digital is taking an upward climb, while IT is actually a bit of it's seeing a decline. But it's not just that paper alone. If you look at some large conference information systems, some special issues that we've had recently, they did a word cloud to look at the submissions that they received, and you see digital becoming one of the biggest things that people are actually studying. But beyond that domain, if you go to even non-I, so in the broader spectrum management discipline, you see special issues where digital is beginning to come up as one of the core things that we're asking for more submissions about. So one of the things that also strike me is, I've heard about a setup also here in Manchester, is that in CBS, you have different departments, different units, all doing research on digital. It's beginning to become one of the vocabulary that we use across disciplines within the broader management field. But if we take a step besides academia and also look at practice, what's actually happening within the industry. This is a slide that a colleague of mine in MIT made. And the key thing here is that when you think about digital, when an organization makes a budget about digital, typically this budget goes to the IT department, but there's a shift that's happening. Now, this shift is such that you see that when organizations make budget around digital, it's no longer all allocated to the IT. It's now going to different pockets within the organization. So there is a shift happening, and we are trying to find a way to capture that shift that we are seeing. So before I move on, I'll just give a bit of a short story about how I actually ended up being interested in this digital X. It actually started when I was doing my PhD. So I had a struggle trying to pick, kind of align the distinction between digital capability and IT capability. I started out my PhD looking at the role of IT capabilities in disruptive innovations. I ended up with a dissertation that's about digital capabilities in disruptive innovations. Now, the shift that happened in between there really got me puzzled and confused and trying to figure out, so when I stopped using IT capability and when I started using digital capability, what has changed? What am I trying to signify? Now, I find myself using the word digital capability, but I'm drawing on literature that talk about IT capabilities. So is it just a shift in the terminology? Am I trying to point out to something that's substantially different? These are questions that I really could not resolve back then, but I got into this situation because since I was looking at disruptive innovations, digital innovations were the most relevant domain rather than IT innovation. So there was a clear demarcation between digital innovation and IT innovation. When it came to IT capability and digital capability, like, so what is distinct about those two? Now, this puzzle led me to putting together a panel. And since I don't have the answers, I knew some people that had the answers. So these are some of the superstars in the information systems field, Varun, Alok, Stephanie, and Khaled. I said, okay, you know what, let's have this public debate about digital X. Now, this is something that's emerging. What really is it? And they had 3 things they had to come up with answers to. Is this creating confusion or is it bringing clarity? What is digital X that ITX is not? How does prior ITX literature, how does it fit? So these are the questions that we had to debate in this panel. And I have to say, this panel has actually been quite pivotal to my career, because it's actually launched a lot of things that I never actually anticipated. Now, this has been the fire, or this has been the trigger that lit the fire that's made me to try and make more sense of what this digital X is, or what we mean when we add digital to something. If we take a step back and look at the history of how we got to where we are, in the information systems field specifically, the emphasis has typically been on the technology. I mean, and if you think about it, in management schools, information systems happen to be a domain where it's at an intersection between, you look at the social side of things, you look at the technology side of things, and business side of things. But whatever happens, technology remains core. I dare say that actually in the business schools, the IS is one of those that's the core focus is more technology, while others can look at technology as well, but they have more distinct areas, like marketing is marketing, technology is being used. But IS, the way this particular paper that I have there by Wanda, and it's actually one of the classics, it presents it that, well, you know what, there's a desperate need to seek for the IT in IT research. It's like a callback to thinking about IT in the research that we do. And Davis, who is one of the founding fathers of the discipline, actually, if you look at it, when he has defined it, you see that technology is really core. Man-machine system that support the system that utilizes computer hardware and software. But the digital actually predates IS discipline. it's the fact, it's not new. So it's not as though we've invented something new suddenly. It is a terminology that's existed way before this time. Now, if you look at a dictionary, there is a sense that you can pick from. Now, my bachelor's was in electrical electronics engineering. Digital is a term that's used in that domain. And when it's used, the sense is to run the zeros and ones. But in the information systems, that remains. But beyond that, there's this view of digital being seen as the use of computer technology. So when you acquire technology, you say, oh yeah, you're doing digital by doing that. If we look at how it has also evolved in the literature, there are some papers that have been put up there. I don't have a clicker, but can you see my mouse move?
No.
The mouse does not move. Okay, I'll just move over and point. So, so this paper actually kind of started the discussion, but at this point, it wasn't really boldly making a move towards digital, but it was telling us that, look, guys, the tables have turned. There is a shift going on. And this paper, in conjunction with another paper, so this paper actually started talking about organizing logic. They formed the foundation for this other paper, which has been highly cited on digital innovation. And this paper, in a way, you could say it established the conversation about digital innovation in the discipline. And this paper came out a couple of years later, and they were rather bold in saying, you know what, there is a difference between IT strategy and digital strategy. So they were one of the first ones to come out and say, look, they made a delineation between something we've known before and now what is considered the digital equivalent. And then recently, Youngjin and Richard came up with a very bold one that I call digital first. And the idea here is that, well, you know, typically you have the physical first, then the digital later. But now you know what? We're in a time where the digital comes first and then the physical follows. So these are just some papers I've highlighted to show you how the discussion has evolved in the field. Recently, as I was preparing for this talk, I stumbled on this particular paper. Now, this paper actually was rather bold in saying, look, folks, the digital is different. And I brought it over to just highlight that this is a growing discourse. This paper came out last month. So the discussion of trying to make sense of what we mean at digital, the things we already known before, it still remains an ongoing discourse. And in my mind, I'd say it's rather a greenfield where there are opportunities for us to still make contributions. So that's a bit about how we got here, how digital has been characterized in the past. Now let's talk a bit about digital X in future studies. Where do we go from here? And there are two open issues that I will touch upon some of these, but there are still conversations that are ongoing. The first one is about when do we need new digital theories or do prior theories suffice? Initially, I actually framed it as, do we need new digital theories or do prior theories suffice? And the second question is, how could we delineate between digital X and X or ITX? How do we claim, position digital, whatever it is, in respect of relative to what we've known before? And these are two issues that I think still remain. Otherwise, we'll keep adding labels to things we've known before that bring no value. So let's take the first point. So the first point, I think this is still an ongoing debate. So I organized a symposium in Academy of Management, again, to get scholars to debate this. And the title is literally that, in need of new theories or the prior theories suffice. And this was actually a fun panel, because what I did was I had Nick, Ola, and Youngjin, they formed one camp, and they argued that, yes, we need new theories. The old theories just don't work. And then I had Philip, I had Bob Heinings, and Raghu Garu, and Michelle, they formed the other group saying, yes, no, we do need prior theories. It was just fireworks, because everyone had different perspectives on this particular debate. But I'd like to take a pause here and actually just sample what do you think? Then I'll tell you a bit about this GIT piece that Kale and Varun just wrote. Do we need new digital theories or the prior theories?
Bob Heining's on that.
Yeah,
Because so he's an institutional thinker.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it's obviously been promoting that,
he was promoting it.
which is a theory that predates digital. I remember he wrote a paper, didn't he, about digital and institutional theory.
That's right, he did. But what's your take? Do you think we need new theories or prior theories suffice?
I mean, I think it all depends on the tradition. I think that's what Brian is getting at. The training and the tradition that each of these researchers came from, right? I think people in institutional theory see everything as an institution. Even a technology is conceptualized as an institution.
That's right.
And they're probably right? Because you need an institution to build a theory, or it's part of a broader institution. But then when you have people that focus more specifically on technology, like Ola and Yunjin, I think it's obvious that they would push forward for new theories, right? So it comes back to our discussion that we had earlier around perspective, and obviously there's a lot of people that have done organizational-based research that would look at things like culture and internal dynamics between employees in a company, etc. That would place a lot of emphasis on prior theories to understanding whether digital or IT-related phenomena, right? For them, and as you said, outside IS, I would think the reason why outside IS people tend to think of technology as almost like an external object, right? They don't spend too much time talking about it because it's something that, even a pen is seen as a technology. It is a technology, right?
Yes.
It was innovated in some way. It's a type of technology. So for them, what's important is what's happening within organizations and institutional structures, etc., as opposed to the technology itself. So it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, what's interesting, I think that's what you're getting at, is even they, there have been some special issues in Journal of Management Studies or Academy of Management Perspectives, even organizational studies, I think.
Yes,
a new quote. Paolo Patrone, the editor-in-chief, is actually part of, he's here, he's based here. I think what's changing is that people are beginning to realize that the digital is no longer something that you discuss as part of it's a lab experiment. It's actually part of our everyday lives, right? It's touching our everyday lives.
It is.
Right, and we use smartphones to do anything. I think it's pushing a lot of theory efforts from across fields, even outside IELTS. I think that's what you're getting at with your idea of lexicon. Right. Changing the way we think about phenomena.
And I think you nailed it with the pushing, actually. I think it's that push. So there's a shift going on. But I don't want to get ahead of the talk. I'd like to kind of sample our thoughts here on what do you really think? Where do you stand? Do we need new theories to capture this digital that we're seeing? Or can we just survive with the old theories? Yes, sir.
So I think we need to get into the heart of the specific theories that we are talking about. So, for example, if you think of say some organizational theory, for example, theory of behavioral theory of the firm, can we say that the theory applies in the digital age or it doesn't? I tend to say that it does apply in the digital age, and maybe we don't need to change many things and nuts and bolts of that particular theory. But if you think of, say, a different theory, for example, a theory of sense making, I think we need to change the way we think of sense making theory, because in the extant literature, there is a huge role of humans in making sense of the environment. And now we are seeing a lot of sense making is being done through technologies, which are digital technologies. So we need to get into the heart of the assumptions of the theory, a role humans play in that theory, and the practices and processes that we theorize about. And if we see that all the nuts and bolts remain intact, then we don't need to change much. But I think in many theories, those nuts and bolts are either replaced or they play different parts now. So then we need to change those kind of theories as we approach.
Very interesting. Any other points from movement? Yes, Tahir.
I completely agree. I think there is no straightforward answer to this question. It will be a good mix. There will be some theories newly defined, but at the same time, the existing theories can also be pushed to integrate for digitalization as well.
Okay, so the answer I'm getting is it depends. I think that's what the three answers are saying. So these guys disagree. So this is a very provocative piece. I really encourage you to go read it. It just came out. It's a debate piece. It's a debate piece, so it's written to provoke. And I and the colleagues here have been asked to give a response to this piece. And some of the things you actually say can resume what we'll be talking about. But the claim they make here is that we have come to a point where the prior theories do not do justice in capturing the phenomena of today. Now, that's not to say they still are not relevant, but they're saying that we need to start creating new theories that capture what is going on here. And I like what you said about the nuts and bolts of anti sense-making theory, because indeed there are shifts, there are expansions that's going on right now that call for new theory. But I think it would be a mistake to assume that prior theories do not work, again, in certain contexts. I think it still falls back to the it depends. But the call here is to recognize that the possibilities that we can unlock when we start thinking about the new theories that we can open up by looking at this digital phenomena. All right, but what we then did in attending to the second question is a paper that we have ongoing with Varun and Alok and Kale. And in that particular piece, we came up with three suggestions, three guidelines that can be considered when thinking about creating or working on a digital themed research. And I'll go through the three guidelines one after the other. The first guideline essentially is about sensitivity to the ontological position that you take when you make a claim that you're talking about digital X. The second one is about explicating what has changed in the context of a phenomena that warrants the need of a new label. Why is it that X is not sufficient? Why is it that ITX is not sufficient? That makes it necessary to now start calling something digital X. The third guideline is about, so what exactly then is the qualitative difference that you're signifying in this particular X that you're interested in? And I will look through each one of them one after the other. So the first one is about ontological perspective or sensitivity. If you look at prior literature, you can characterize the way we use digital into two different buckets. There is the digitization perspective, which we call a technical view, as well as a digitalization perspective. So you can talk about digital based on one of these two perspectives. And so there is literature that already talked about what is digitization, what is digitalization, and I already have references for them here. With digitization, so very simplistic overview of how this is seen. Digitization technically is like you're talking about the bits, the zeros and the ones, when you convert something from the physical to the digital, analog to digital. So that sense is what is referred to when you talk about digital from a digitization sense. Another perspective which Generous has actually popularized is the view where digitization could also be the process of like acquiring technology so that you can digitize your processes. For example, you typically fill a form to get into university on pen and paper with pen and paper, but now the same process has just been made into an online form. So you just digitize that process, nothing fancy. But with digitalization, now the emphasis is, so there's an abstraction from this thinking about bits, zeros and ones to the application of the zeros and ones, the application of the technology. So it's a shift above just thinking about technology. Actually, Generous has a very fantastic sentence that I think really captures the fact that there's a distinction. She says, all the digitization in the world will not in itself make a business a digital company. And that already points to the fact that, well, digitization is on a different plane and digitalization is on a different plane. Again, so I'm really drawing on Ginny here. There are others that talked about it in reference that should, but I think the way she presents it is really, she brings a lot of clarity. So when she talks about digitization, she makes you think about operational efficiency. So you're taking technology to make you do the same thing, but you're doing it faster, more efficiently. But when she talks about digital, she talks about rapid business innovation. So she speaks to managers, and that's why you can see the rapid business there. In my world, or my thinking, I'll just say, just maybe block this and just focus on innovation. So while digitize is about operational excellence, digital is more about innovation. And what this brings to fore is actually some of the things that Manu said. When it comes to digitalization, it's about taking the technology and thinking about what else can you do with the technology. And in there is innovation. And when you start thinking about innovation, the human becomes actually more present, because here you're thinking about unlocking the imagination to think about, well, what else, what more can be done with this technology? So with digitalization, it sits more on the perspective of going beyond just the technology. With digitization, the emphasis is very much on the technology. So I'll use two examples to kind of present how this could look like in a written piece of paper. I'll use Faulkner and Ronde's fantastic piece of work, and then Wessel's recent paper. So in the Faulkner and Ronde paper, what they did is they had a paper that talked about theorizing the digital object. And in this paper, so they talk about the bits as things, so it's still the zeros and ones, that's where they're focused on, and they talk about how you can have the same bit, but it can resident on different material bearers. And actually, it's not just one non-material bearer, you can have several. It's a really well-written piece of paper, but it just helps show how a digital object is not just one non-material object, because each one can be a bearer of another non-material object. But at the end, anyway, all non-material bearers do reside on some form of material bearer. So the whole point of this paper, I'm not going to go into the details. You can see that they take a very technical view. They are more interested in the technology, in the bits, in the zeros and ones. So this is a digitized or a technical view that they've taken. When they talk about digital, you can see that that's the perspective that they're taking. Now, if you look at the second example, which is the paper by Wessel et al. Now, this again talks about digital transformation. Again, another digital. But the digital in this sense is not just about the zeros and ones. It's very much about, here, this is where the digital technology resides. And they talk about how the application of the digital technology leads to the redefinition of the value proposition. And that's where you start getting digital transformation. And they use that to kind of differentiate with IT transformation, which is more about, again, the digital technology is being leveraged to support the value proposition. So here you see a different level of abstraction, very much focused on the application of the technology. So these are just examples how two different papers can be using the word digital, but they subscribe to kind of different views of in terms of the where their viewpoint kind of stems from. So it's kind of an ontological stance there. But in the paper that we worked on, we kind of not disagree, but we made a point of departure, saying, if you look at the way prior literature characterize this digitization and digitalization, it seems to be sort of like opposite spectrum. So you're either here or you're there. So it's a spectrum is a spectrum view. Rather, we suggest that perhaps we could actually consider them as not just opposites, but they're, each time you talk about a digital X, it actually has components of both of digitization and digitalization concurrently. Now, there might be more on one side or resolved onto the other side, but you typically have both. If you read the Faulkner and Rundle paper deeply, at the end of it, they start talking about how all these zeros and ones have been talking about, how it has implications for the society. They start talking about its implementation, its implications. And you can see the connection there. If you look at the Western et al. Paper, it goes deeper and also talks about very much about its IoT technology that we use in the cases. So at the end of the day, it's a co-constructive view where you have both digitization and digitalization represented. To make it a bit clearer, so here's kind of an illustration that we had in the paper that shows you that starting from the real world and social norms, yeah, that's kind of during the digitalization pane. But if you dig down, it actually starts from the technology. You have the material layers and bitstring layers there. But on the other hand, if you also focus on the bitstring layer, it still is a representation of the real world that you're doing even while you're there. So it's hard to just take one and ignore the other. They are kind of always concurrently present. So this is the way we kind of suggest that we kind of consider the ontological perspective. Now, the second guideline is about justifying the context shift. And I think this is actually a very important guideline because it's kind of the table stakes. You need to be able to convince anyone that something has changed that makes it indeed necessary to start using a new label rather than the existing label that has served us well. What is it about the context, the phenomena that has changed? And that's why that's what guideline 2 is about. And we propose 4 different shifts that you can leverage in making such a claim. One is what we call agential shift. Now, with agential shift, it's very much about, I think Mayu actually pointed to when you talked about, with sense making, you've talked about humans, but now with technology, actually, there's an expansion in that space. So you could use that. So the agency of what humans can do right now, the things we can do with just this device, as Panos mentioned, is incredible. There's an expansion in the agential space of what we can do because technology affords it now much more. And technologies also, there's an expansion in what technologies themselves can do. The second shift that can be leveraged is what we call a semiotic shift. Now, the semiotic shift is also an expansion in the type, the variety, and number of things that can be digitally represented. Now, for example, think about Internet of Things. Before, when you think about technology, you think about computers, maybe the phone, your screen. But now, all the things around you actually could have a digital representation. Your table, your chairs, your fridge, your pen. Now, you have an expansion that's going on. That's not something that's been captured by vocabulary prior to now. Think about digital twin, where you have a physical replica of something that's functioning in a physical space. So there are several things that you could argue that's happening in the semiotic space that's warranting a need for a shift in vocabulary. The last one, I kind of like this Russian dolls because the idea here is each digital object is a building block for the next digital object. So it's kind of one, you don't stop. Once you get the other one, it actually, you then realize, oh, you can actually create something else. You create the next one, realize, oh, actually from this, you can also create that. And that's the nature of digital innovations, really, because it is combinatorial by nature. Now, the ability, the building blocks that we have right now, it's on a different order compared to the way we think about boxes, when we think about technology as a box and arrow setup, now we have a lot more combination that's possible. And then the last one is what we call the unique economic shift. I think this actually touches upon democratization of technology. I guess pretty much every one of us here can perhaps remember a time where there's so little we can do with the technology we have compared to the things you can do with your mobile phone right now. Now, there was a time where you have to be in a company for you to even have access to a computer system. But today, the things we can do, the power of this mobile phone that you have here, with platforms, digital platforms exposing us to infrastructures that are beyond what an individual can access. Now we have this shift in economics that also opens up a lot of innovation. So these are some of the shifts that you see going on that we're trying to capture, we're trying to grasp, and these are things that's necessitating a change in our vocabulary. So these are some examples, these are some suggestions, but it's not limited to these. The idea, the message here is, in order for you to add a digital to an existing label, you need to justify that there's a shift, something has changed. These are some examples, some ways you can do it, but it's by no means limited to those four. I'm going to give an example of a study that kind of does this distinction. It's a work in progress that I'm doing with some of other colleagues, and it's about looking at the distinction between digital and IT within some organizations. And these are interesting organizations. Does anyone know Danske Bank here? Probably. Well, you probably may know Daimler. If not, you probably know the car they make. And then there's Fastens. So these organizations were the organizations we studied. And the interesting thing here is they all have digital units, but structured very differently. In Danske Bank, they had digital units that were considered moonshot initiatives. So there is mobile pay, you may or may not know mobile pay. So it's like Apple Pay. It's really huge in the Nordics. It actually emerged from one of these initiatives. What they did here was they had several digital units focused on very specific initiatives. Daimler, what they had instead was they had a group that informed all the other business units on how they could actually leverage digitalization within their own businesses. So they are not having a profit and loss responsibility, but they're just thinking, you know, you're collecting this data from these devices. Why don't you consider? So they're helping each one of these guys infuse some form of digital elements into their business. Well, the last one is a very interesting one, as you can already see. So they do have a digital business unit, which means, like these other business units, they also have profit and loss. So they create innovations, they sell things, they have customers, but their business is very much about creating software, platform business, subscription models. But they also have, the same unit is also responsible for doing what this unit is doing. So it's kind of a hybrid model. And the other fascinating thing about them is, while these guys have the IT units serving the whole organization, here you have the IT units kind of serving the whole organization. These guys have the same, but the IT unit is embedded within the digital business unit. So it's not a separate entity like these other guys. So it was interesting, and we kind of tried to make sense of, so what is different and what are they trying to signify when they have digital units separate from the IT unit? What are the organizational logic? What are the assumptions, the drivers, the practices that define the IT group versus the digital group? And that's what we went into these organizations to study. Now, we bracket this into three rationales that help us look at the organizational logic: the strategy rationale, the technology routine rationale, and the technology rationale. I'll go through with them one after the other. So the strategy rationale. So when you think about IT strategy versus digital strategy, we say IT strategy is more business aligned while digital is business centric. And here's why. When you think about IT strategy is typically a follower strategy. It's a strategy where the way it works is, this is the business strategy, please align with it. Now, if the organization says our strategy is to cut costs, IT strategy automatically then becomes, how can we help the organization to cut costs? If the strategy is we want to have faster delivery to customers, then IT strategy then becomes, how can we help the organization make faster delivery? So it's a strategy that follows typically, it's very much a business aligned strategy. While the digital strategy, what we observe is these are typically integrated into the business strategy. So it's either a business strategy on its own, or it is part of the business strategy. So it's not a strategy that's following the business strategy, but it is integral to the business strategy. And the second one about routine, so what we observe there is that with IT, the logic that's kind of characterizing IT in this organization is about stability, while for the digital, it is more about enterprising. And this comes about by looking at the fact that they're very much operation driven. So it is, the mantra is, if it is not broken, don't fix it. But when it comes to the digital unit, our observation is they're very much opportunity driven. They're very much enterprising. And they keep thinking, how can we create and capture value? Especially if you're going to be a unit that has profit and loss, you need to think about how do you serve customers, how do you create new things to entice the customers. Then the last rationale, which is technology, I actually find this one very interesting. So IT typically sees technology as an enabler. That means that the way IT thinks of technology is, this is what the technology does. How can we use it to achieve what the organization wants? So technology enables the IT to deliver, to make things happen. But the digital, the way they think about technologies, this is what the technology does. What else can we do with it? And that's a very different thinking. So it's not that they work on different technologies. It's not like digital unit has special technologies. No, they can use the same technology, but the question the technologies differently. While these guys are thinking, how can we use this technology to help the organization achieve its goal? The digital folks are typically thinking, okay, what else can we make out of this? And I like this analogy of brick versus clay, because the way I see how the IT thinks about technologies, they see it as bricks that can be used to make really fantastic edifices, to create structures. But the digital, they see it as a clay. Now think about a potter making a clay. You can come up with different shapes. You can define how you want it to come out. With the brick, it's pre-made. You just set it and you can do amazing things with it, but it's very different with how the clay, you can use the clay. Right, so this is an example from that study, and this is just putting them side by side to see, give you an overview of how we characterize them, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go to the third guideline. And if there are questions at any point, please just shoot. But I know we have to go for 5 minutes for discussion. You can also keep your questions till then. Okay. All right, if we look at the third guideline, before I talk about the third guideline, let me put it into perspective. When it comes to, while the second guideline is about what has changed that has made it necessary to have the digital label, the third one is an opportunity for you to put a stake in the ground to say, this is what is different. So that's the distinction. The first one is you convincing others, making a compelling case that there is a need, while guideline 3 is about you saying, okay, this is actually what is different. So signifying a qualitative difference. I'll use 2 examples to demonstrate this. So the first one is a study that I was also part of, where we looked at digital versus IT-enabled transformation. The GIS paper actually did the work of this. This paper is one that has this example. And the way it kind of presents it is when you think about IT transformation. Now, from an organizational perspective, so it's important to put this caveat in mind. This looks at digital transformation from an organizational perspective. There are several perspectives to digital transformation. But within that, IT transformation is kind of like seeing a cub become a lion. Now, this is a faster, stronger, and more efficient entity. Now, when you do IT transformation, you can make an organization faster, stronger, more efficient, whatever it is that they already do. But with digital transformation, you can kind of draw an analogy from a larva becoming a butterfly. What that means is you see a shift from one entity to a fundamentally different entity. Now, think about a manufacturing company that typically sells machines. And then gradually you see this company now beginning to sell softwares, having IoT platforms, having data-driven business models. And the competitors of this company is no longer other manufacturing company, is now SAP, is now Microsoft. Now, you see, there is a transformation that's taken place. It's still a manufacturing company, but in the valence, in the identity of the organization, you start seeing that there is a shift towards having a digital valence. There's also a huge company in Germany called Otto. Anyone knows Otto? Now, Otto is started as a retail catalog retailer back then, and now it is second only to Amazon. Now, think about the shift that has happened there. Now, it's now, when you think about the identity of this organization, you now see a bit of a digital company within how you characterize that particular organization. So this is an example of how you show a qualitative difference between digital versus IT. This is explained in this particular model I showed you earlier. And the idea here is that digital technology redefines the value proposition. Think about a manufacturing company or Otto. Now, by leveraging digital technology, they redefine their value proposition and you see the emergence of some sort of new organizational identity, a shift in the organizational identity, if you will. While IT transformation, well, the call to the lion, it will support that existing value proposition to make it better, no doubt. But you end up with a reinforcement of the existing organizational identity. All right, there's a video actually on YouTube that explains this. I put the link there so that you can also see it when you get the slides. So I've just used the example of digital transformation. There are other contexts where this has actually been done. So this is digital transformation, there's digital strategy with Paraguay, digital units with Tumbas and Young, digital objects. We had Piccoli, actually, that's a fantastic piece of work as well on digital infrastructure. There's also digital innovation by Coley and Melville. So there are different areas where you can see how other studies have done this qualitative difference. We then go forward to show, to give some tips on how you can actually do so. The how. The first one is what we call the identification pathway. Now, the identification pathways, the way to show a qualitative difference is to bring empirical difference to this pathway. So empirical data, so based on empirical evidence, you can see that this is how digital is different from IT. So here you argue based on what's your empirical evidence. It might be empirical, it might be other forms, but you need evidence to show that this is the distinction between the X and the digital. The second pathway is what we call construction pathway. And this is, if you kind of think about things such as AMR papers, now it's not about data, it's about logical reasoning, drawing inference from prior literature or from anecdotes, but just making logical arguments to convince that, look, this is how the digital is different from what we've learned before, be it an X, be it an ITX. The last one is the synthesis pathway. Now, the synthesis pathway is a pathway where you draw on existing literature. So it's not about empirical data, it's not about logical arguments, but it's about how has this been characterized in prior literature. The Melville and Coley paper on digital innovation, that's what they did. They did a literature review. And based on that, they came up with the definition of what is IT innovation and what is digital innovation. The construction pathway, the Bioadvantage paper on digital strategy I talked about earlier, this is what they did. So it wasn't based on data, they used a lot of anecdotes, talked about Amazon, Apple, and they used different anecdotes to kind of come together to make a really compelling case for the distinction between digital and what we've known before. While the identification pathway is the paper I just showed to you on digital transformation. So these are some suggestions on how one can go about doing that. All right, so these are the three guidelines that I'll put forward in this particular paper with the hope that it can actually stimulate future research as we think about how to deal with the digital X phenomena. So the digital X phenomena, I think, is something that's it's great getting more legitimacy. The fact that it's not just happening in one bucket, it's not happening just in academia, it's happening in practice, it's happening across different disciplines. And I think it is an opportunity. We have an opportunity here to actually prevent it from diluting its conceptual value, because as it is right now, if there is no concerted effort to try and think through what we mean by digital, it's going to become another disruptive innovation where everybody claims to be doing it and everyone has some variant of what it means. So some reflections and implications. So the first one is, I think by paying attention to kind of explicating what we mean when we talk about digital. Let's not, rather than using it as a buzzword, as a label to just make our work fancy, it would be helpful, particularly for cumulative development of research, if we could actually have a sense to what we mean, what is different when we use digital versus what we've known in the past. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do this. Now, this is not just ITX, but also X, because it's not added in replacement of only IT, but it's also added to X. So it is an opportunity for us to do this. And I'll show some papers that have actually done this in other X domains, such as strategy and work, among others. But one other thing that I just want to also note, and perhaps to folks that have done research on IT, is that although digital and IT are different, they are distinct, I think we shouldn't be so fixated on trying to point to the fact that they're different, but we should recognize that they coexist. So if you look at the examples I gave to you in those organizations, they actually coexist. I think there's an opportunity in looking at the relationships between the digital and the IT, how they coexist. I think it has theoretical value as well as practical value. And last, I think it is digital X serves as an opportunity as well as a threat for the IS discipline in particular. So it is an opportunity for all disciplines, because any discipline can actually take the lead on a digital X phenomenon, because X exists, be it innovation, be it strategy, be it marketing. We have these domains before, and digital just gives us an opportunity to actually capture what's our reality in this current era that we live in. And it could come from anywhere. So it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity for IS, but it's also an opportunity for other disciplines. It is a threat for the IS discipline, however, because we get to a point where the distinctiveness of what IS brings to the table then begins to be questioned. And I think it is important for IS to actually champion this conversation, because IS has done a lot of research in the digital space over the years. It's just a matter of now bringing this up and elevating it to make the discipline a reference point for other disciplines. So in a nutshell, I'd just like to point out this, that there is a shifting baseline. There is a shift that's going on right now, and scholarly lexicon, paying attention to them is important because they are critical enablers of scientific knowledge in our community as academics. And this is not limited to information systems. I just want to highlight that, because if you look at entrepreneurship journals, you have research that's looking at the digital X phenomenon. If you go to the strategy domain, you also have research that's looking at digital. And this is academic management, where you see also work done in terms of the workforce. It is a big tent, and there's enough room for everyone for us there. So having said all that, I hope that there will be stimulated, I hope you'll be stimulated to consider what opportunities there lie in here. And and one more thing. Thank you. All right. Yes, Ms. Nadia.
You said fascinating, because I work very closely with different services firms. And companies that they say they have an IT unit, and the IT unit is in charge of legacy systems, that have databases, that have data in different places. But then at the same time, they're desperate and opportunistic to develop their district capability.
Right.
And they set up a group that sometimes they call it a business intelligence group or a data analytics group. And that group provides services to the legal professionals, because the legal professionals, they want answers to questions. Is it a good idea to settle a legal case? What is the optimal time? Did we have to deal with similar cases in the past? But the problem they have, there is a kind of tension between the units, because the business intelligence unit, they are constrained by the hardware kind of decisions made. Because, for example, they want to develop tools, but you need to have Python installed, and the team, you have to go through a kind of negotiation with them to persuade them to install Python, or they have all these legacy systems, dispersed data, and they have to invest in Azure solutions or other solutions to integrate all these databases so that the business intelligence teams can have access to real-time data. And it seems to me that the role of the chief information officer or the chief operations officer, well, there's always a person in the company, but these two units that have to report back, I think it's vital because they're trying to integrate that, but also to dissolve any tensions. And I have to say, because I've just finished the project, Legal Services Fair, and I'm about to start a new one with a colleague whose area is in innovation. We are on the lookout for a theory that we have not really found yet, but we are in the view that it's there. It's so relevant. So I'm looking, maybe you can say something now, or I have booked a slot with you later on today, if you have any thoughts. But there's definitely something there that everything you said, I can say it's happening.
Right, indeed.
In that particular sector.
Indeed. And thank you very much. I'll be very happy to also discuss this in detail when we get to meet. But yeah, everything you say kind of resonates with what we've seen in the studies we've done. In some cases, one of the quotes actually we use in the paper is someone described IT as a place where ideas go to die. Unfortunately. But I think what you're pointing out actually is one of the recommendations I had there about let's look at the relationship between them. And it's not every organization that has labeled what's going on there as digital. And that's why that paper talks about the logics, organizing logics, because even though you've not called it digital, a lot of things I heard you talk about are the organizing logics of what the digital units are doing, the business intelligence, business analytics. And what is going on there is, there's a lot we can learn in thinking about how will these two relate, because I think we're going to need them going forward. You're going to need to start thinking with these organizing logics of digital, so to speak, but you cannot relegate the IT. It's actually the lifeline. The way I see it is, if you think about a bus with the wings of a plane, now the bus without the wings will not move without an engine. I think IT is that engine. But the best the bus will do is it will keep cruising. But once you give it the wings, the digital, it can actually go to places that probably could not have come before. So that's where I see the relationship between digital and IT. And I think there's a lot to be learned. And I'm also open to hear other thoughts and suggestions, ideas that you may have in that regard. Thank you.
I think if I can jump in,
yes,
I like a lot of the ideas that you presented. I was wondering whether, because you mentioned maybe the way we need to think about digital X is more as a process of transformation, right? So I wonder whether by making those distinctions, we are essentially making, binary differentiations of what was before, what is now, what's IT, what's digital. I know that was not the intention.
Right.
And analytically, I understand the exercise that you want to, as you said, justify the context and signify the qualified difference, right? And I understand those points, but are we also in the process making hard distinctions? And how can we address that?
So that's a very interesting point, right? Because there's always that risk of the binary, and it's always present. But the flip side is the risk of conceptual dilution, because then we don't know what we're saying. If I'm referring to IT and I'm talking about digital, and you're referring to digital as something completely different, and you read this paper. So I talk to PhD students, I'm like, yeah, so which is it? I think about my PhD where I talking about digital, but I'm using reference to IT capability. Why can't I just use IT and just make the world the same place? So I think there comes a point where we need to know what we're talking about. And once we do, then we can actually foster cumulative tradition. But how do we do that without doing binary distinctions? I think people like you are in the place to do that.
Push it back.
It's a spectrum, isn't it? It's a spectrum of different companies that have different profiles. Because there's someone had this diagram, and that is, again, it is a spectrum between different companies with different profiles.
That's right. That's right as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me.
Well, it's not like a question, it's more like a comment, because I'm also working on digital transformation. In order to explain sometimes whether, for example, an organization is on the way for digital transformation, I have to explain what was going on before. And that's a hard distinction. So, for example, if you consider the university place, the university has technology, it is a goal. But at some point, like most of them, like 5, 7, 8 years, they started claiming that they are in the process of digital transformation. So it's really difficult to explain why they are in that process and how that process started. It's easy to say that this process hasn't ended yet because of technology constantly evolves and you adopt, etc. But it's difficult to explain when this started. And it's a common challenge. Recently, I have tried to use the idea of changing strategy, just because the idea is not part of your functional strategy anymore. So it becomes, as you mentioned also, it is integrated into your business strategy. So, but it's not really clear if you wanted to put it in a timeline. So again, it's very vague.
So I can tell you that I feel you because I've gone through that journey in those papers I've written. So when you write the papers, they come out with these neat boxes, well crafted. The reality is really messy, and I think that's exactly what you're describing. When the digital transformation starts, it's such a fuzzy notion. In my case, at times we need to make analytical choices like Carlos was alluding to earlier. In my case, what I did was I picked on their strategy, and I had a unique, so the ethnography study, so I was but I was literally not employed, I was in the company. So I have a desk, I could see what was going on. So what I did to make a break, and it's going to be a choice. The break I made was a choice I had to make. And I picked the strategy when the strategy was released. But the reality was, before that strategy, a lot has happened that became the foundation for what we see in that company right now. So I think my pick would be, you make the choice that makes sense for the story that your paper is trying to tell, or your study is trying to tell. But I could not agree more that the reality is so much messier than the cute little kind of tables we put in the papers.
We have also cases where the strategy is also emerging. So it's not that they have a strategy from the beginning.
Right.
So things become even more complicated
Right.
in those cases. Because
Right.
it's even more dynamic complex.
Yeah. So so the way I think about it is I kind of try and find the trigger. And so again, that trigger doesn't explain everything, but I try to find what was the trigger that led to the transformation. And typically, organizations either have retrospectively created a narrative for why we're doing this, or it has emerged over time. So at times, the trigger could be from the environment. Either there's an opportunity they're trying to capture, or there's a threat that has made them wake up, okay, we need to change. Those triggers have been very relevant as well as for like say, okay, this is where I start my analysis from, or where I start the story of this transformation from. But again, my point is, it's an analytical choice. It does not, it's hard to say this is where it happened. Maybe it's just a CEO that slept, had a dream, and started. Who knows? But it's a choice we make as scholars. But thanks, great question. Yes.
I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to say, I mean, I don't have a question, but brilliant slides. I really like all the analogies that you have used. Very, very, very good examples, and it gets at the heart of what you're trying to convey. So I'm going to copy some of the material that you
have. I can send the slides in all the time.
And so one more thing I wanted to say is, if you can go back to the slide where one of the projects where you're working on different organizational structures.
Organizational logics.
And I wanted to speculate a little bit and say that are we heading to the so are we heading to a situation where there will be a fourth? I mean, if we were to extend this diagram, and if we add a fourth organization where things will be very much integrated within all the existing units, that you don't anymore call it digital. So what I'm saying is, are we heading to the phenomenon where the word digital is going to be dropped eventually because everything is going to be digital? So if we think of it, what is happening, for example, in academic institutions. So academic institutions start in departments like, for example, digital marketing, right? And I see that they are going to serve a purpose for some years, and eventually it's going to be integrated with marketing, or marketing will be integrated with digital marketing. Eventually, same way, for example, business schools hiring data science professionals to be able to do machine learning methods, right? Eventually, what I see is more and more PhD grads are being trained with these methods, and they have these skills which will make the digital redundant. So what I'm saying is there is a digital shift, but probably we are heading to a world where digital would not be required as a word in itself. Just some speculative.
I think it's a fantastic one. Actually, I think it's either of the two. I like the marketing example you gave. Is there it? Yeah, there's this. So actually, you could actually end up being the digital being absorbed into the marketing, or it could actually become digital marketing becomes the thing that, because then every type of marketing then becomes there's a digital element to it. You never know. So we're in speculative realm now, guys. But it's a very interesting notion. And the reality is, that's why I say it's both an opportunity and a threat, because it might get to a point where it's like, yeah, well, everybody does it, everybody has it. That may be the need for us to have a centralized discipline that's actually looking at the digital across the different texts. It might be. But it might also be that, yeah, everybody's doing that. Why do we need a distinctive unit doing the digital? And that's the part that's threat to the IS discipline. But it's an opportunity if it's like, okay, guys, this is not our turf. We just need to understand marketing or strategy to the core. the digital pathways, but the theories that those guys are doing there, they probably do it better. Like scholars do some research in marketing, in strategy and innovation. The strategy, innovation, and marketing folks, they just do that much better. But the IS is good with the digital aspect. So we might come to a point where, like, okay, you know what, they become a reference discipline for that. But it might also be the opposite way. So you so on point with that, only time will tell. But at this point, all we can do is either galvanize energy towards saying, okay, what opportunities can we, or what benefits can we get out of this, or how can we chart a path that we can follow. I think you got panels thinking.
No, I'm observing this in the practice also, right? So, for example, if you think of the kind of jobs and the kind of hiring that's happening across all the organizations, so you see more and more technical, so AI developers, data scientists being hired across all the industries. And sometimes I also started seeing ads where they are hiring the traditional domain experts, but with some skills with these technologies, right?
Right.
So Bank's hiring traders, but Bank's hiring data scientists, but Bank's hiring traders with data science skills, right? So I'm seeing some shifts going on, and that's why I'm speculating something of the sort like that.
Yeah, I think that's also another important thing, the competence. So when you start thinking about the competence required in most of these digital and like you talk about, it's no longer these tech experts alone. It's a merger between the tech folks as well as the business folks. And for business intelligence, you need an understanding of the business, but you also need to be able to run a Python, for example. And that competence, it's a broader, it's a more heterogeneous group than the homogeneous thing that's typically found in the IT, right? And that's also another shift that's going on. Yes, sorry.
Just two things. I know in IT governance, there's been some theory about business facing and business integrated IT settings within organizations. So I'm wondering how different it is from such a theory from the information system governance about integrating IT into organization strategy in order for the organization to be able to live, rather than having IT facing, whereby you only come to IT when you're in, or rather integrating IT into business strategy in order to be able to help the business to be able to innovate. If the business is able to innovate internally, I understand they become efficient, and hopefully, if they decide to innovate outside the world of the organization, that efficiency can help them to possibly innovative digital to be able to. So I'm just wondering how this is different.
Right. I mean, that's a very great question. So I think what's important to note is that this is not a punctuated shift or a sudden occurrence. It's actually been a gradual shift to where we are right now. So most of the things, in fact, exactly what you said about the IT governance literature, it has evolved into being what is now the digital that you see today. So the part that's the integrated, so you can always trace it back. So it's kind of an evolution, if you will. But if you look at the core, the dominant focus of IT still remains the IT aligned view. And that's why IT is serving everybody, right? But the integrated one is now what you now see digital now emerging to be. So you can trace it back to some of the things we've known in the past. Either they did not take off or did not fly, or they were in the fringes, and there was a dominant that still kept going on. And now what was in the fringe is now beginning to take a life of its own. It's beginning to become bigger. And that's what the shifts I was talking about really is trying to capture. Now there is a shift that has made it so much that we can no longer ignore them or relegate those to the background. So very interesting observation there.
Okay, the second thing is the butterfly and the lion.
Right.
I really love that. So my question is, if the digital is different, because when you look at caterpillar and the butterfly, two different things. That made me remember the complexity theory
assist, for you to understand the system, the complex system. You have to look at it at the level of the interactions rather than the different. So in theorizing dealing to that, I'm thinking possibly all theories may not work because we're already in a different phase in time. Just like looking at the different components rather than focused on the interaction. So if the caterpillar in nature in characteristics is different with the butterfly, and if we have to begin to theorize, we have to think we need to start from the butterfly rather than come from the caterpillar.
Why not? I mean, I think with theorizing, there's actually no limits where we pick it. Again, I think kind of like the analytical focus is a matter of the focus. Which parts of it are you actually interested in theorizing? Because we can theorize either from the start or from the end or the middle or even the shift, the evolution from larva or caterpillar to the butterfly. So yeah, why not? And I hope you're thinking about being one of those.
Oh yes,
Yeah, final story.
No, I don't have a question. I was just scratching my head.
Yeah, one example is the fintech company.
Right.
We thought you can't call it a bank anymore, in my opinion. Once a day I picked up my phone, I said, okay, let me just try and open an account. And I did everything approved within an app, and I was able to transfer money from my old account to the new account with a very sophisticated app and everything. So this company are now becoming more like a technology.
Right.
From the start.
Right.
Their competitors are not the bank.
That's right.
So if we begin to look at them as a bank, then possibly, maybe, rather we should start from where we are today. And some of them don't even know any infrastructure. They actually build those things. They don't make it. So to me, I just felt the technology space is moving so fast.
All right. I really think you should read that paper by Varun and Kale. I actually encourage everyone to read it. It's really provocative. It encourages us to take a leap. I mean, it is provocative. I do agree with the spirit of the message. I don't agree with everything that has been said there, in the sense that I fear that there is a naive reading if you don't read. If you read, just quickly gloss over the message, it may lead to what we call clickbait research. And I think that's no good, no help to the research discipline. If everyone wants to come up with the next fancy label without heeding what we've known in the past, we're building knowledge brick by brick. And if you want to start a brick entirely, it might just drop because you don't have a foundation to build on. So I think that's what it could lead to, but what the call us to do, I think, is really bold, and I think it's highly needed.
I think that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Abayomi.
Thank you very much, everyone.
It's going to go to waste.